Welcome to Program 2 in the Making Marks series. In the first program, we looked at methods of surface removal. In this one, we're going to be looking at marks of addition and impression. We'll start with marks of addition using fiber, paper, modeling, and sprigs. The first one we'll look at is the use of fiber. This is dipped in a liquid clay or a slip and then attached to the surface. And during the firing process, when it gets to that point, the fibers will burn away, but they'll leave the pattern of what was there before. So I'm just going to dip these in the slip here and then drape them onto the pot. This is just burlap that we're using, and this is a thick slip here. So what we can do is just squeeze out some of the slip. Is a delightfully messy thing to do, but lots of fun, and can create really quite interesting patterns on the surface of the object. It can be draped loosely or tightly over the object and just put into place wherever one wants it to be. You can spray it with different colors of oxides and various coloring approaches, or you can use colored slips to do it and attach it to the surface. But it provides quite an interesting textured background for future or for further development. I'd roughened the burlap up by pulling out a number of different strands and widening the mesh of the burlap so that it's not just a straight squared pattern of fiber. It becomes much more interesting the way that the surface will develop from it. We'll flatten it as much as is possible to the pot without losing the patterns of the fibers that are there. Other techniques or other fabrics that can be used are various forms of net and lace and muslin, anything that will quickly absorb some of the liquid clay and then be able to be applied to the surface. I'm just going to apply these pieces of lace, soaking them first in slip and then applying them to that surface. This same technique has been used historically to create a lot of different patterns for figurines that have lace dresses are done in this way. A lot of things that come from Meissen and Dresden in Germany and various parts of England have this same sort of technique used in them for creating these lacy patterns. I'm going to work into this with just a little bit of paper that is soaked again in the slip and applied to the surface. There are quite a number of different ways that paper can be used. Very often these days a lot of artists are using paper which is made into a pulp with the clay and added to it, and then it can be used for creating quite a lot of different sculptural sort of things. I'm just using newspaper here, dipped in the slip, and the newspaper will burn away in the firing and leave a raised pattern that once it's finished firing and gone through the glaze firing, it will be quite substantial. Before then it's rather fragile, but once one gets it to the glaze fire stage, it's quite substantial. You can create quite a lot of different surfacing variations in using paper in this way. This small porcelain piece at the front here by Sue Harrow of Canada has paper added to the piece of aperture over there, which gives this beautiful translucent quality with the light passing through it. And as far as the fiber draped surfaces. We can see here the raw part with what I just did. And here's a finished example of the same sort of technique used by Pauline Pelletier of Quebec. And possibly she has integrated copper in with the slip that creates these soft blue, turquoise, and greys and pink colors when the pot has been fired in reduction. Another technique which employs variations in surface, both raised and cut away, is that of modeling and additive pieces, which you can also cut away parts of it as well. So what I'm going to do here on this piece is just do a small modeled chrysanthemum flower, just taking little balls of clay, applying them to the slightly dampened surface and pressing it in with the finger, so that we'll have a whole series of different small floral patterns occurring. These are just small balls of soft clay that are pressed into the surface. And then I can take another small coil of clay and use it as the stem of the flower. Just press it down onto the surface a little bit. I could either add leaves that are made to it, or I can take a knife or another tool and just cut the sort of pattern of leaves just very simply in that surface. So we've got variation occurring in the way that the glaze will affect the surface. The same techniques that have been used on this piece, essentially additive parts and subtractive parts, have also been used on this piece by Brian Newman, an English ceramic artist, who has thrown lots of little tiny minaret pieces on the potter's wheel and then applied them to the slab-built construction here. Some of the minarets have been cut in half and attached to window areas, and various apertures have been cut in to create interest in the surface. Not only that, but we have many of the techniques that we've also already looked at in this program, of scratching with knives and texturing surfaces, and also impressions that we'll see later. The whole thing has been enhanced by the type of very dry, matte glaze that's applied to the surface, giving it a texture almost like burnt sand. The last additive process that we're going to look at today is that of the use of sprigs. Sprigs are small molds made in plaster that have a recessed pattern in them that is then filled with clay, and that is then applied to the surface. The most commonly known sprig decorated pots are those by Josiah Wedgwood, the Wedgwood Blue family, and various other colors of raised white pattern on a blue background. All of the little white parts on those pieces are made separately in molds and applied to the surface. And then we can just damp the surface of the clay and just apply that sprig mold to the surface and create a raised pattern. And then we just put in another soft piece of clay, and if you want to create this sort of pattern going all the way around the piece, it's a very simple, effective way of doing repeat patterning in a raised or low relief level. One of the most famous traditional ones of old is seen on this big brown pot at the back, which is called a Bellarmine. It's a German beer or wine container, and this little head part here is done in a sprig mold and applied to the surface in exactly the same way as I just did on this piece here. So we've looked at various methods of adding to the surface, marks of addition. What we're going to look at in the rest of this program is various marks of impression. Impression is any time that you take something and press it into the surface to create some sort of pattern. What I'm doing here is just pressing a wooden tool into the surface of this somewhat soft clay and creating a pattern or a shape adjustment that makes the pot seem rather gourd-like or melon-like or pumpkin-like. So you can use just about anything for making an impression, from little rubber stamps that you can buy at corner stores through to antique pieces of carved wood that are used for making patterns on Indian cloth. All of these things are quite capable of producing very beautiful patterns with a limited amount of skill on the part of the user. The skill comes with the placement and the composition of what is happening. But these patterns can create very lovely examples that can be used on objects or on tiles in different ways. And once we consider how the glaze is going to go over these patterns, we can get many, many different final results happening. This is a very simple border pattern from an Indian fabric. So we could just push that into the clay, remove it and turn it around and push it in again. Other simple things that I've found that we can use are the sort of plastic screening that is used for keeping leaves out of eaves troughs. And if you put that on the surface of the clay, either you can roll it in by hand or with either a large rolling pin or a small rolling pin such as this one that creates a bee's nest sort of pattern, honeycomb pattern that might need lifting out with the point of a knife. But it creates quite lovely spontaneous patterns without much technique being required in order to get a good result. We used burlap before in one of the other techniques. Now we can roll the burlap into the surface, and instead of it being a raised surface, we've now got burlap pattern occurring that can be used again as background, or it can have filling of mineral colorant or glaze or liquid slips, various ways that these things can be further developed than what we have here. I'm going to, with this piece of clay, make a plate which I'll then press mold over a form by rolling this pattern in first on one half of the piece. Then take that out and use a piece of string to create a design down the other side of the piece. All of these sort of techniques are quite simple. It's just as far as the imagination can go of the person who's doing it. You can create wonderful patterns just by using pieces of string and various other found objects pressed into the clay. What this will do is just leave a depression wherever I want to leave this string in place that will then hold the glaze in a certain way. I think that's fine there, so just roll that into place. If I can remove that. And then just take a template and decide exactly where I want to cut this, and then just put that down, take a knife and trim off whatever I don't need. And that will be the pattern on the inside of the plate. All that I need to do now is to release the slab from its backing and then turn it over onto this plastic dome that I'm using as a mold. Turn it over, remove that, and then sponge down any irregularities in shape and surface. It will form to the contours of the plastic dome and create quite an interesting dish that we can put feet on or not put feet on, or whatever we decide to do with it. There's any one of them. Many, many configurations that could be done from this point on. Utilizing the same principle, we can take all sorts of natural objects and press them into the clay and create very free patterns of organic material. The thing with any of these sort of patterns is you need leaves that have a fairly strong vein pattern in order to make the most out of it. But what we've got here, as I remove this piece of Japanese maple leaf, we've got some of the wings left in place, but we've got quite a lot of very interesting, soft, gentle pattern that once again will fill up with glaze in a particularly nice way. This sort of stuff will burn away in the firing, so we don't have to worry about it. Here we see 3 examples of finished pieces using the same techniques as I've just demonstrated. This one with the leaf in the background, after it was bisque fired, it was coated with a little bit of iron oxide that's gone into the deep impressions caused by the veins and the edge of the leaf itself. And then over that has gone a clear glaze or a Celadon glaze, which has given us quite a deep and rich varied pattern in that surface. Depth perception and depth color of glaze will, as it gets deeper, it'll usually get darker. And this piece here has a rutile glaze on it, and as the glaze gets darker, so it becomes bluer and deeper. Where it's thin, it's much lighter in color. Here we have the line caused by the string pattern, and that has a very light edge to it, and it goes down to a very deep color right in the depression of the line. The same sort of thing is happening in here with this copper reddish glaze on it, with the burlap pattern here, stamped impression over the top of it. And we're getting these white lines or light colored lines around the edge of the stamped impression. On certain clays, it might come out as a dark line around the edge. With certain glazes also, it will become a dark line. But here we're working with porcelain, and so consequently the porcelain being white has affected the way that the color varies. The next technique I'm going to look at is that of using lino cuts. Lino cuts and wood cuts are done on either lino or composition material. And what it is, it's a method of printmaking, a very simple method of printmaking, which normally you use the top surface to print. What I want to do first is to make a drawing of this teasel. Well, that's a simple, very simple basic drawing, but it's enough for me to then just work up the surface utilizing standard tools of the lino cutter's art. This is a little burin or gouge, small gouge, used for cutting very fine lines. And we have various sizes of gouges, but I'm just going to be using these two on this one. This is for cutting broad lines. Once this is done, it provides me with a block that I can use many times, because the impression will not be destroyed in the process of putting it on clay and pressing it in. I don't know of anybody else who uses the technique particularly. Picasso did some quite wonderful things with it, and it's open to a lot of very beautiful linear patterning. Because what actually happens is, when we do a print on paper, we print off the top surface of the lino or wood if it's a wood block. But when we're printing it into clay, we reverse that. So what I'd actually cut away becomes raised. And so you can control the way you cut, which creates a different sort of interplay of pattern. So with this one, I'm now going to print from that surface. Just mix up a little ink just to see how this is going to work out. Since I'm not making a print, I'm not that worried about it, and just getting a good idea of how this impression is going to work. Now I'll just take a piece of paper and lay it onto the surface, and then roll. So this is the traditional way of doing a lino cut or a woodblock print, just printing off that top surface. And if the ink's rolled on properly, we should get a black and white image of what is going to be pressed into the clay. So now I'm going to use that lino cut and make impressions on this plate. I'm going to do 3 impressions side by side. This technique can easily be used for tiles or for press molding for a plate, for instance, so we could press mold over a form as we did earlier. There are lots of different ways in which you can use this technique. It's not only usable on flat objects, you can use the same principle on thrown objects or other objects that are hand-built. Lino cuts like this can be easily attached to paddles rather than using them as 2 separate units. Or paddles themselves can easily be cut with patterns using a router, a carpenter's router, or they can be wrapped with rope such as this one here. And I'm just going to demonstrate on this next vase here, beating this one square with the paddle wrapped in rope. Sorts of different patterns of rope, the way that's twisted. And these twists can also produce very interesting patterns on the surface. In fact, in Japan, this same technique of rolling rope patterns on the surface, it's generally used in the name of mishima, but this technique goes back at least 5,000 years. In conjunction with the rope pattern on here, I'm going to use a stamped pattern as well. And this is just a stamp that's made out of a small amount of porcelain clay that's carved with a flower pattern on the front end. Now I'm just going to paddle it into a square, roughly a square shape. When it's stiffened up, I'll put liquid clay into these patterns and then scrape it off the surface so that there'll be a linear pattern, will be emphasized by the color of clay inside. In front of me here I have a group of pots by Tatsuso Shimaoka in Japan, who uses the Mishima technique to a great degree, using various different types of rope, as you can see on the edge of here, and then it has been stamped in the middle, and then the whole thing has been covered with a white slip that inlays into the depressions. After that it's been scraped on the surface and has a glaze applied. The same technique has been used on all of these pieces, utilizing different ropes in the process. Also, there's different firing processes being used here. This vase in front of me here has been fired in a wood firing kiln, and wood firing kilns have a lot of variability depending upon the way the ash from the fire attaches itself to the pot. The other two have impressions such as the herringbone impression on the small cup at the bottom, and another form of angled rope impression on this large vase here. In this program, we've looked at marks of addition and impression. In our next program, we're going to be looking at marks of liquid and colored clays.